Sometimes you find a game that just scratches a certain itch, and for me, that is the Capcom Beat 'em Up Collection. This is a game that I had seen on Steam. I know it's also, I think, on all the major platforms, and it retails for $20, which I thought was a little high. And this weekend, I saw it on sale for $12. So I picked it up, and I found myself really enjoying this collection of games. I mean, this is basically Final Fight and some games that are very similar to Final Fight. You get Captain Commando, the King of Dragons, Knights of the Round, Warriors of Fate, Armored Warriors, and Battle Circuit. And it's just the classic Capcom beat 'em up formula. And honestly, outside of Captain Commando and Final Fight, I had never really played any of these games and or seen them in the arcades. To me, Final Fight really was the Capcom beat 'em up. I remember, the summer it was released, or at least the summer I discovered it in 1989, 1990, around there. And playing the game always had an association for me of summertime, of vacation, of being down at the Jersey Shore, having the warm sea air and kind of smelling that wafting into the arcade and playing these games. So for me, to get a collection of games like this in just kind of an easy bundle. It's nothing special. It has a couple of features that are nice. It has some online multiplayer. Admittedly, I haven't gotten it to work as of yet. There doesn't seem to be an audience for it, but I think it functions in the same way as, say, the Street Fighter thing, where you play your game and then someone jumps in. You can set up your own server. It has some nice concept art where you can kind of sort of look at the marquees, the instruction manuals, and again, all of the sort of stage art and things like that for these games, zoom in, zoom out. But it just does what I've always said a good emulation package should do, and that is, yeah, I can, of course, find all of these things on MAME, but it puts it in a nice, convenient package that plays pretty well. In addition to that, you have all of your typical emulator-style things. You can expand the screen, you could change the border, you can give it all sorts of filters. The filters are not bad. I would go with A2 or A3 as kind of the most convincing CRT filters. However, for me, I just don't mind playing, the pure pixel version. Everything looks great. Doesn't seem to be noticeable input lag. I mean, if you're an arcade player and you've played the original arcade machines recently, I'm sure you'll detect some inaccuracies. But overall, it is just a fun package. So we'll run down the games. Not that there's all that much to say. I mean, Final Fight is Final Fight. It created the formula that so many other beat-em-ups followed. It is arguably the greatest beat 'em up of this era. I know some people would say Streets of Rage 2 is better. I may actually fall into that category, but Final Fight is the nostalgic pick for me. And then really every other game kind of builds on the Final Fight system, as it were. Captain Commando has some more, zany, interesting cartoon characters, some bright anime-style art, and, it's generally inoffensive and a lot of fun. Again, that's the only other one I remember seeing in the arcades. King of Dragons reminds me of Golden Axe, or actually some of the Capcom D&D games that they released, which were kind of medieval, side-scrolling beat-em-ups with some RPG mechanics, swordplay, stuff like that. This is like a first attempt at that kind of game, and I think it succeeds. Knights of the Round, again, very similar, medieval brawler, focus on weapons. Again, to me, it reminds me of Golden Axe, maybe a little bit more technically sound than Golden Axe, a little bit more going on graphically, but ultimately, Final Fight in the Middle Ages. Warriors of Fate kind of seems like Capcom's answer to SNK's Sengoku. Not really as good as Sengoku, but, it gives you some opportunities to battle on horseback, has some more challenging enemies, more enemy variety, but fun game. I would say that if I had seen this in the arcades as a kid, I would have been excited. Probably the standout game in the collection is Armored Warriors, which came out in 1994. And as I was playing it, I was like, oh, this has a soundtrack very similar to Street Fighter Alpha 2, which is one of my favorite Capcom soundtracks of all time. Sure enough, I looked this up, and this is a CPS2 game. The others are the CPS1 board. And it just feels like a natural evolution of the formula. It doesn't change the mechanics of Final Fight. Doesn't really change the kind of mindless button mashing that this genre really is. But it just adds better visuals, better music, and then also you can kind of customize your robots as your enemies drop parts. You can kind of add it to your mech, your robot, if something on him falls off. So it adds a little bit more variety, and it's definitely a very, very refined version of what Capcom was going for in 1989 with the original Final Fight. And then lastly, you have Battle Circuit. Battle Circuit is the latest of these games, came out in 1997, and plays fast, kind of floaty compared to the other games. It is the most vibrant, the most anime-like of the entire package. I'd have to say it is not one of my favorites, but again, it's unique, and it's something that, had I seen this in 1997, had I been going to the arcades in 1997, that was kind of probably one of the last years that I went with any regularity into an American arcade. I would have, I think, been nostalgic for the Final Fight formula then, and I probably would have enjoyed it for what it was. But, certainly an interesting late release in this Capcom genre. So as far as the negatives go, I think one negative of this collection is, again, the $20 price tag. I think for $12, $10, $8, this is incredibly solid, it's fun, it's nostalgic. At $20, especially if you didn't grow up with these games, I think the modern player will probably see them as very shallow. And of course, they are very shallow. They are arcade button mashers designed to get you to insert more quarters. So some parts of these games are cheap. If you recognize the patterns, if you play them enough, you can kind of get through them on only a few credits. But, as you amp up the difficulty, you'll just find yourself dying, inserting credits, and repeating. So it gets a little stale after a while. But I don't think these games are designed for, hour-long play sessions. Taken for what they are, 15-minute diversions, 20-minute diversions. They're still incredibly fun. And like I said, to me, they just remind me of summertime. So, you crack open the window, feel the warm air, crank up the speakers, and at least for me, having grown up in this era, I can return to that time. A couple of other nitpicks, as I said, the online, I could not find an online game. Not that I necessarily like to play games online, but to me the multiplayer is really in-room multiplayer. So I could see if you had a couple friends who were also fans of this era, you could really have some fun, have a few drinks, and kind of relive that arcade experience. The sound is a little on the low side, but again, you can kind of crank up the volume. And while the Xbox One controller, which I use for the PC, is fine, if you do have a joystick, that will really kind of take you back. I used it with my Vulix joystick, and, it just felt crisper, felt a little bit more accurate, but certainly playing these games on a regular controller is no problem at all. So I if you find this for $12, $10 or less, it definitely has my recommendation. But again, if you grew up with this era and you just have that itch to play these types of games, it may not be bad at $20. But figured I would come on and share some thoughts. Definitely a fun game, and I would actually be curious to know if people played all of these games in the arcades. Like I said, I had not heard of anything beyond Final Fight and Captain Commando, so for me, discovering these new Final Fight style games was worth the price of admission in and of itself.